The beast's rage was uncontainable. It obliterated everything: the White House, the monuments. Nothing could withstand its power. The Capitol was gone, the ground trembled, and from the shadows, a nightmare emerged. A colossal ape with eyes burning with fury rose from the earth. Its roar echoed across the land, a signal of the destruction to come. Washington, D.C. stood helpless. The ape's massive fists shattered the city, reducing its iconic buildings to rubble. The roar of destruction was deafening. America's heart was falling. In the Oval Office, the president's command rang out: defend the Capitol. But as the military mobilized, the question lingered: could anyone stop this force of nature? A peaceful morning in the heart of Washington, D.C. Tourists stroll past the monuments. Commuters rush to their offices. Everything normal, everything calm. But then, the earth shook, barely noticeable at first. A tremor so faint it could have been dismissed, but something was stirring deep beneath the city. The ground trembled harder, the rumblings now unmistakable. Panic began to rise as people realized the force wasn't natural. It was something far worse. Suddenly, the earth split open, huge fissures tearing through the streets. Trees were uprooted as the ground buckled beneath them. The city was crumbling. And then, out of the abyss, it rose, a towering ape, its eyes glowing with fury, its fists clenched, ready to wreak havoc. The roar echoed across the city. It was a primal sound, one that struck fear into the hearts of every soul in Washington. The beast had arrived. Panic erupted in the streets as people fled in all directions. Cars crashed into each other. Buildings groaned under the strain. It was every man for himself. With a thunderous punch to the earth, the ape sent shockwaves through the city. Streets collapsed. Buildings crumbled. The destruction had only just begun. The ape's eyes locked onto the White House. Its massive steps reverberated through the city as it made its way toward the heart of American power. With a single stomp, the White House was obliterated. The iconic building was nothing more than rubble under the ape's power. The city was now engulfed in flames. Buildings burned, smoke rising into the darkened sky. Washington, D.C. was no more. It was a battleground. The military was called in, tanks rolled down the streets, helicopters circled overhead, and soldiers prepared for battle. But could any force stop this beast? The ape swatted the tanks aside like children's toys. It tore helicopters out of the sky. The military's weapons were useless against its raw power. With no resistance, the ape continued its path of destruction. Its eyes were set on the Capitol, the symbol of American democracy. And then, with one devastating blow, the Capitol crumbled. The dome exploded into a cloud of dust. The heart of American democracy lay in ruins. The National Mall, once a place of peace and reflection, was now a graveyard. The Washington Monument cracked and fell. The nation's symbols were erased in an instant. The Pentagon, the symbol of military might, was in the ape's path. It too would feel the full weight of its fury. With one almighty strike, the Pentagon was reduced to rubble. The core of the nation's defense was gone, buried under tons of concrete and steel. Washington, D.C. was nothing but ruins. The nation's heart had been torn apart. What remained was a city of smoke and ashes, the air thick with despair. In one last, desperate effort, the military launched everything they had. Missiles streaked through the sky, fighter jets screamed overhead. But was it enough? The missiles exploded around the ape, but it didn't flinch. It was as if nothing could harm it. No weapon could stop the giant's rampage. And then, with a roar that could be heard across the world, the ape let its power be known. This city, this nation, had fallen. As the ape continued its rampage, the power grid faltered. The city was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the raging fires that now consumed what was left of the city. The destruction spread like wildfire. The National Archives, the Lincoln Memorial, everything once revered, smashed to pieces. The city was becoming a graveyard. Even the Smithsonian was no match for the ape's might. The prized collections of history were wiped out in moments, each building reduced to debris and dust. The White House grounds were once a symbol of elegance. Now, they were flattened under the ape's fury. Gardens trampled, fountains shattered, the very soul of the nation destroyed. The military scrambled to get the president into safety, but even the bunkers that had once been considered impregnable were no match for the monster on the surface. The Secret Service fought valiantly, but their bullets had no effect. The giant ape swatted them away as though they were insects, its rage unstoppable. As the destruction spread, the world watched in disbelief. News outlets across the globe were flooded with images of terror. Was this the end of Washington, D.C.? The end of an era? Helicopters descended, trying to strike at the beast from the air. But the ape's sheer power was overwhelming. One by one, they were swatted from the sky, crashing in fiery explosions. With one final swing of its colossal hand, the Capitol building was erased from existence. The symbol of democracy turned to ash. Even below the city, no safe haven remained. The metro system collapsed into the earth, subway trains derailed, and the underground tunnels were consumed by the chaos above. The National Guard stood their ground, but they were no match for the ape. Tanks were crushed, soldiers were thrown like rag dolls, and their lines were shattered within minutes. The Lincoln Memorial, a symbol of hope and strength, was no more. The ape's footsteps crushed it into nothing more than rubble, erasing a piece of American history. In the chaos, the president was rushed to safety, but the city around him was falling apart. The government was in disarray, unable to even protect its own leader. America's heart lay in ruins. The city that once stood as a beacon of freedom was now nothing but burning wreckage. Washington, D.C. had fallen. Around the world, nations reacted with fear and confusion. Leaders convened, unsure how to respond to the nightmare unfolding in America's capital. The ape continued its unstoppable march of destruction, leaving behind nothing but devastation. No landmark was safe, no place sacred. It was a path of pure annihilation. The destruction didn't stop in D.C. It spread outwards, reaching the suburbs. Entire neighborhoods were flattened as the ape made its way through, leaving nothing standing. No place was safe. The once great city of Washington, D.C. had been reduced to rubble, a grim reminder of the devastation the ape left in its wake. The nation was broken. People fled, taking refuge in shelters, watching in horror as their capital burned. America, once a symbol of strength, now trembled in the face of overwhelming power. The ape stood tall over the ruins, surveying the destruction it had wrought. The city that had once been a beacon of democracy was now a shadow of its former self, reduced to ashes beneath the giant's feet. No monument was spared. The Washington Monument crumbled under the beast's weight. The Jefferson Memorial shattered like glass. These symbols of America's past were now dust in the wind. Around the world, nations held their breath. What had started in Washington, D.C. was now a global crisis. Could this monster reach them next? Was there anywhere safe? In the face of devastation, the president spoke. With the Capitol gone and the nation in turmoil, he urged citizens to stay strong. But even his words felt empty, lost in the terror. The best military minds in the world met, but their strategies fell short. No force, no weapon could stand against the ape. The military's might was nothing before the fury of this giant beast. As the last line of defense formed, a final stand was made. Soldiers fortified positions, ready to fight the beast head-on. But deep down, they knew this was a fight they could not win. The ape unleashed its fury once more, smashing through the last remnants of military resistance. Tanks exploded, soldiers were flung aside. Nothing could slow its advance. The final wave of fighter jets swooped in, missiles streaking toward the beast. The sky was filled with fire and smoke as the jets released everything they had, but it was futile. With each passing moment, the ape's wrath intensified. It grew stronger with every strike, its power seemingly limitless. The city's remaining life was being sucked away, block by block, building by building. And then, with a final blow, Washington, D.C. was gone. The skyline that once defined a nation had vanished. All that remained was ruin and smoke. The city was silent. A city that had once been alive, thriving with hope and promise, was now nothing more than a burnt-out shell. There was no hope left. Around the globe, people watched in stunned silence. What would happen next? Could this monster be stopped? Or had Washington, D.C. simply been the beginning? The president, with nothing left to protect, spoke once more, his voice heavy with sorrow and defeat. "We have lost, but we will rebuild." His words faded into the distance. With no choice left, the military retreated. Their final attempts had failed. The city, the nation, everything was lost. The ape had claimed victory. With Washington, D.C. reduced to rubble, the ape continued its path of destruction. No nation, no city, no place was safe. It roamed free, a force of nature with no end in sight. For the survivors, there was no escape. Huddled in dark corners, they watched as the monster moved on, hoping they would be overlooked. But how long could they last? As the ape continued its march of destruction, world leaders and scientists scrambled for a solution. Was there any way to stop this creature? Could anything save humanity? A final plan was put into motion. The world's best minds united in one last-ditch effort to stop the beast. They had to act fast, before there was nothing left. The world held its breath as the countdown began. Time was running out. Could this weapon be the key to ending the ape's reign of terror? The world's ultimate weapon was ready. A massive missile, filled with experimental technology that could potentially stop the ape. But the question remained, would it work, and at what cost? With a deafening roar, the missile launched into the sky, the last hope of humanity, soaring toward the ape. Could this be the end of its terror? The ape sensed the missile in the sky, its massive eyes narrowing in defiance. It let out a roar, almost as if challenging the world to bring it down. The missile collided with the ape with an earth-shattering explosion. The shockwave was felt for miles. For a moment, everything went silent. Had it worked? Had the ape been defeated? As the dust settled, it became clear. The ape was still standing, bloodied, battered, but not defeated. It let out a ferocious roar, its defiance unbroken. For a moment, hope flickered. The ape was wounded. It faltered. Could this be the opening the world needed? But that hope was quickly crushed as it regained its strength, rising from the ashes. Enraged, the ape turned its fury on everything around it. The streets shook, buildings cracked, and the skies darkened as the monster's rage reached new heights. The clock was ticking. Humanity was running out of time. The world had been shattered, and all eyes turned to the monster that had destroyed everything they once held dear. In a final desperate bid, the remaining forces joined together for one last strike. They knew the odds were slim, but they had no choice. If they didn't fight now, all hope would be lost. The final stand had begun. Soldiers, with nothing left to lose, charged at the beast. It was a fight of desperation, but they were no match for the sheer power of the ape. The world's leaders gathered, realizing that this was not just a fight for Washington, D.C., or even America. It was a fight for the survival of humanity itself. In the face of overwhelming terror, humanity showed its will to survive. Ordinary citizens, stepping up to do whatever they could to protect their loved ones. It was a final stand, a testament to the human spirit. The sky itself seemed to darken further, the sun blotted out by smoke and ash. The world was entering its final chapter, and it seemed like the ape had won. As the end neared, families said their final goodbyes. The soldiers, exhausted but resolute, prepared for their last stand. Humanity's final breath seemed to hang in the air. The ape stood tall, victorious, its rampage leaving no question. The world lay at its feet. There was no hero, no savior, only the beast and the desolate land it had claimed as its own. And with one final deafening roar, the ape made its dominance known to the world. There was no question. This was its world now, and nothing would ever be the same again. The world was forever changed. In the wake of the ape's destruction, There was no recovery. Cities were gone, nations shattered. The legacy of destruction left nothing behind but sorrow and dust. Humanity's hope was extinguished. There were no more governments, no more leaders, no more heroes. The world lay at the mercy of the beast, and it had no mercy. The end of an era had come. The world that had once been full of promise, of dreams and ambitions, was no more. It was replaced by a barren, empty land where only the ape remained. And so, the ape's reign began. The world had fallen, and the future was uncertain. All that was left was the aftermath of its fury, and the question, would anything rise from the ashes, or had the ape destroyed it all?